So we're going to be simplifying rational expressions, and we're going to look at examples when there are just monomials, meaning there's no addition or subtraction. We're going to be looking at an example that has a binomial, meaning there are two terms connected with an addition or subtraction, and a monomial, where there's one with no addition or subtraction. And then the last two examples are going to be all binomials. So I have addition or subtraction on the top and the bottom, addition or subtraction on the top and the bottom. So we're going to look at number one. And again, number one is a monomial. So there's only one term and there is no addition or subtraction for a monomial. So what I do with these is I like to separate the numbers or the coefficients and the variables. So I like to look at them one at a time. And I'm looking for how I can reduce and cross out anything they have in common. Whatever is the same, I want to be able to get rid of. So I'm going to look at the number 12 and the number 30, and I'm realizing that they are both divisible by the number 6. So 12 is 6 times 2, and 30 is 6 times 5. And that's the biggest number that they both have in common. So if I were to get rid of the 6, I would have a 2 on top and a 5 on bottom left over because I reduced the 12 and the 30. So instead of 12 over 30, I'm going to write 2 over 5. Now I'm going to look at the x's. X to the power of 3 means there are 3 x's on the top. And x to the power of 2 means there are 2 x's on the bottom. I'm going to get rid of what's exactly the same. So 1x on top, 1x on bottom is exactly the same. 1x on top and 1x on bottom is exactly the same. And notice I've got 1x left over. So I no longer have x cubed or x squared. I now just have the letter x on the top of the fraction over 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine 2 times x is 2x, 5 times 1 is 5, and this would be my answer to number 1. All right, next up is number 2. Again, it's a monomial. There's one term on top and one term on bottom. There is no addition or subtraction. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to separate. I want to keep the coefficients or the numbers together and the variables together. So I'm going to go ahead and put 28 over 24 and then x to the power of 5 over x. So now I'm going to reduce my fraction and then find out what they have exactly the same and get rid of it. All right, so to reduce this, I want the biggest number in common between 28 and 24. And the biggest number they both have in common is the number 4. 28 is 4 times 7. 24 is 4 times 6. Since 4 is on top and 4 is on bottom, I can get rid of the 4s. I would have a 7 left over on top and a 6 left over on bottom. So I no longer have 28 and 24. I now have 7 over 6 when I reduce my fraction. Next up is looking for what else they have the same. So x to the power of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1x on bottom. So if there's 1x on bottom and 1x on top, they go away, and left over are 4 x's. This gives me x to the power of 4, and it's on top of the fraction. So underneath would be the number 1. 7 times x4, 7x4. 6 times 1, 6. And this would be my answer to number 2. All right, so that's if I have a monomial on the top and the bottom. So there's no addition, no subtraction here. All right, next up is example number 3, where I have a binomial and a monomial. So a monomial is alone, but a binomial has a friend. So if you notice, a binomial will have a plus sign or a minus sign. And we want to put a binomial in parentheses because these friends stick together. We don't want to separate the friends. So what we're going to do is going to have, we want to look for what do they have in common inside the parentheses. So we're going to look to see what's in common between 4x squared and 36x. I notice they both have an x, so I'm going to take out an x. I also notice they're both divisible by 4. So 4 turns into 4 times 1, and 36 turns into 4 times 9. So I can take out a 4 and I can take out an x. So if I take out a 4, I have a 1 left over. If I take out an x, I have an x left over. So 1x is going to be in the front. Then there's a plus sign. And now I'm going to look at the 36x. If I take out the 4, I have a 9 left over. And if I take out the x, then I have no more letters left. The only thing left over is the 9. So it's going to be x plus 9. Now on the bottom is my monomial, so just 8x. All right. Now that I have my parentheses and I have my 4x and my 8x, I'm going to look to see if I can reduce any numbers. So I'm going to look at the number 4, and that's just 4 times 1. I'm going to look at the number 8, and that's 4 times 2. If I take out the number 4, my leftovers are 1 over 2. I also want to see if there's anything exactly the same. If there's anything exactly the same, I'm going to get rid of it. I notice there's 1x on top and 1x on bottom, so I can get rid of them. Now this x plus 9 has no match down here, so I can't get rid of the x plus 9. So my leftover pieces, my answer to this problem. Let's look at my reducing. So what numbers are left over? I see a 1 on top. I see a 2 on bottom left over. And I crossed out my x's, and x plus 9 is also left over. Another way you can write this is just x plus 9 over 2. I always recommend using parentheses when you see a binomial, because that means x and 9 belong together and we cannot tear them apart. So this is my answer for number 3. Okay. Next up are just my binomials. So remember, a binomial are friends. They either have a plus sign or a minus sign, and I want to put them in parentheses. X minus 4. So x and 4 are best friends, held together by a minus sign. Then I have 3x squared minus 12x. So these are friends, held together by a subtraction sign. So what I want to do now is look for what do they have in common inside those parentheses. X minus 4. Well, x and 4 have nothing in common, so I'm just going to leave x minus 4 alone on the top of the fraction. Now I have 3x squared minus 12x. There's definitely some stuff in common here, so let's take a look at what they are. So 3 is 3 times 1, and then I have 2 x's. 12 is 3 times 4, and there's 1x. So what I'm going to do is, I notice that they both have a 3 in common, so I'm going to take that 3 out. And if I take out that 3, that means I have a 1 left over and a 4 left over. I also notice they both have an x. So if I get rid of those x's, then I have 1x left over. And if they both have an x in common, it comes out. So they both were divisible by 3, and they both had an x. So 3x came out. Let's look for those leftovers. 1x is left over, minus, and a 4 is left over. Okay. Now our goal is to see, is there anything I can reduce, or is there anything exactly the same that I can get rid of? Well, if I look at my numbers, 1 over 3 is as small as I can get, so I'm going to leave this with 1 over 3. I see an x on bottom. I don't see any single x on top, so I'm going to leave the x alone. But what is exactly the same, x minus 4 and x minus 4 are exactly the same, so I can get rid of them. So when you have parentheses, the parentheses have to match. So all that's left over is 1 over 3x. And if I rewrite that a little bit nicer, it just looks like 1 over 3x and box it up. All right. The last one, number 5. Okay. Number 5, again, I have two binomials. I know that because they are held together by a plus sign. Binomials, we want to put in parentheses. Now I want to look to see what do they have in common. So I'm going to look at the very top one. 4 is 4 times 1, and there are 2 x's. 8, 4 times 2, and 1x. They both have a 4 in common, so I'm going to put the 4 outside and get rid of the 4's. They both have an x in common, so I'm going to put an x on the outside and get rid of an x to both. What's left over? 1x is left over on the left side. And at the back end, I have a 2 left over. All right, now I'm going to come down to the bottom. I'm going to look to see what 3x plus 6 has in common. So if I look at 3, I have 3 times 1 and an x. If I look at 6, that's 3 times 2. It looks like they both have a 3 in common. So I'm going to put the number 3 outside the parentheses. What do I have left over? 1x plus 2. So 1x plus 2. Now my goal is to reduce any of the numbers if I can, or find something exactly the same and get rid of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at 4 and 3. They don't have anything in common. That x can't be I can't get rid of that x. It doesn't have an x on the bottom. But I do see matching parentheses that are exactly the same. So I'm going to get rid of those x plus 2's. My leftover answer is 4x divided by 3. And box it up.